Can a world champion feel winning and failed the same day? Lewis Hamilton has just had a weekend that reveals all the hidden drama on his new trip with Ferrari. And what he just said behind Miami. It changes everything. The beginning of Lewis Hamilton with Ferrari in the 2025 season has not only been complex from the sports point of view, but emotionally contradictory. What seemed a historical union between two of the most iconic names of modern motoring has become a history of adjustments, tactical disappointments, and fleeting moments of brilliance that barely manage to cover the structural cracks of a team that still seeks its identity. Since his signing, the seven-time world champion made it clear that his goal was one, to achieve the desired 8th world title. But soon he understood that neither the prestige of the Scuderia nor their experience are enough when the car between hands is an unpredictable enigma. The SF-25, the weapon with which Ferrari intended to return to the throne, has shown a worrying duality from the preseason. In long batches it seemed to have potential, but at the time of squeezing performance on a return or adapting to variable conditions, the car has left its pilots at the mercy of uncertainty. Hamilton, in particular, has had to radically modify his driving style, even adopting elements of the Leclerc approach, such as his way of managing the brake and curve, something he had never seen in his stage with Mercedes. This need for adaptation is not a simple technical whim. It reflects a machine with a very narrow performance window, highly sensitive to temperature changes, tire pressure, or minimal modifications in aerodynamic configuration. What lived in Australia was the first blow of reality. In his official debut with Ferrari, Hamilton failed to pass beyond 8th place. He added just a point and found himself fighting with theoretically lower cars, which lit the alarms inside the team. Beyond the position on the track, what really worried was the lack of confidence that the British showed in the car. His body language, radio messages, and later statements showed a growing frustration. For a pilot accustomed to having a predictable and competitive tool, as was the case in his best years with Mercedes, this new stage was becoming a resilience test. These first bars of the season have served to show two things. First, that Hamilton still has talent and determination to compete at the highest level even under adverse conditions. Second, that Ferrari, no matter how promises he has done during the winter, has not yet built a car at the height of its ambitions. And this, more than a frustration, represents an urgency. Because every race that passes without solid results is a lost opportunity for a pilot who, at 40, cannot afford to wait forever. The Miami 2025 Grand Prix represented one of the most disconcerting weekends so far from the new Lewis Hamilton stage with Ferrari. On the same day, he lived the euphoria of a podium in the sprint race and the disenchantment of a disastrous classification for the main race. And that emotional collision was that deep contrast between momentary success and structural failure that made this weekend a raw portrait of the situation that he currently lives both in the Scuderia. From the arrival in Miami, Ferrari knew that the layout would not play particularly in his favor. The SF-25 had shown a tendency to instability in low-speed areas, and it was suspected that the long straight lines combined with closed curves would put the car balance to the limit. However, what was not expected was the climate chaos that broke out during Saturday. The torrential rains forced to delay the beginning of the sprint race for more than 25 minutes, which completely altered the plans of all teams. It was there that Hamilton and Ferrari knew how to read the chaos better than the rest. On a track that began to dry slowly, they decided to bet on dry tires before most. That play, risky but precisely executed, allowed Hamilton to climb from the 6th to 3rd position, surpassing direct rivals that did not react on time. It was an unexpected but deserved podium. The performance in the sprint seemed to open a window of hope. For the first time from China, Hamilton and Ferrari showed signs of strategic cunning and ability to get the maximum in changing circumstances. But the illusion lasted little. When the key time of the weekend arrived, the qualifying session for Sunday's race, the performance of the SF-25 fell apart again. From the start, the car was nervous, with an unstable rear and a lack of evident traction in the exit of slow curves. In Q1, Hamilton needed to use an extra game of soft tires to avoid early elimination, which already compromised its future strategy. The real blow, however, came in Q2. In his decisive attempt, Hamilton suffered a massive blockade in curve 17, the same that had already caused problems before. That curve, apparently insignificant in the design of the circuit, became its executioner. The result, 12th on the departure grid, outside the top 10 and with a bitter feeling of having wasted a Saturday that began as a triumph. But the most alarming was not the result itself, but the feeling of helplessness that the pilot himself transmitted at the end of the day. In post-classification statements, Hamilton was brutally honest. It was a difficult session. Emotions found. The sprint was more a good strategy than pure performance. The car simply has no constant rhythm. It is different every time you leave track. That phrase summarizes the despair of a champion who feels that the car changes their behavior without apparent logic, becoming unpredictable for a pilot of his caliber. Frustration did not come only from lost time, but from invisible work. Because Hamilton had arrived early that day, reviewed data, worked with his engineers looking for every tenth, and none of that had served. The context adds more pressure. In the same circuit where McLaren was again the protagonist and Mercedes continues to show an ascending curve with Russell and Antonelli, Ferrari seems stagnant in an erratic pattern. Small flashes, such as the sprint podium, followed by great disappointments, such as poor classifications or strategic errors that condemn their pilots to row against the countercurrent. And for a Hamilton who no longer competes to consolidate, but for closing his legacy with an 8th crown, these inconsistencies are not only frustrating, they are unacceptable. Miami made it clear that Ferrari can be cunning in chaos, but still does not master the essential, pure rhythm, technical consistency, and a clear direction. And in the meantime, Hamilton is still caught in a car that forces him to shine with spark, but that does not yet allow him to build a sustained winning narrative. The Miami was a valuable lesson, but also a severe warning. If Ferrari does not find answers soon, the podiums will continue to know little. Ferrari has reached the 2025 season with great expectations and the promise that this would be the campaign in which everything would finally fit. The arrival of Lewis Hamilton as a central figure not only raised the media profile of the team, but also strengthened its sports ambition. But what has happened on the track in these first great awards reflects a more raw reality. Ferrari is still a team under construction, trapped between the desire to lead and the inability to execute with consistency. And that gap between ambition and reality is beginning to become too evident. One of the main problems Ferrari is facing this season is the lack of stability of the SF-25. Unlike McLaren or even Mercedes cars, which show a clear and predictable progression between sessions, the red car seems to behave as a completely different entity depending on the day, the circuit, or even the batch. Lewis Hamilton has been especially critical of this, stating that the car changes its behavior constantly, making both the pilot's confidence and the team's work in strategic decision-making. This lack of predictability in balance, traction, and aerodynamic response is one of the greatest enemies in a Formula One where every detail counts. Ferrari's technical team has worked during the winter to solve the weak points that dragged the previous year, focusing their development on improving aerodynamic efficiency and thermal management. And although in paper the improvements are notable, on the track the results are ambiguous. In ideal conditions, as we saw in China with Hamilton's victory in the sprint, the car can be competitive. But in situations that require rapid adaptation or precise management of tires, the SF-25 again shows structural weaknesses. It is a car that responds well under very specific parameters, but outside that window becomes erratic and difficult to control. The contrast with McLaren is especially painful. The British team has taken an aggressive direction in its development, evolving its car almost surgical in each technical aspect. Not only have a fast car, but it is also manageable, consistent in their behavior, and perfectly aligned with the needs of their pilots. This has allowed them to be placed as leaders of the Constructors' Championship and consolidate Lando Norris as one of the great contenders of the season. Meanwhile, Ferrari seems to depend more on specific moments of lucidity than on a solid structure that supports its performance. And then there is internal management. Ferrari still struggles to make strategic decisions that optimize the performance of their pilots. In several races, calls from the wall have been late, conservative, or poorly executed. This has been reflected in bad tire choices, stops in little efficient boxes, or erroneous readings of the development of the race. For a team with so many resources, history, and technical talent, these types of errors cannot continue to occur if they want to compete equally with the leaders. The great challenge facing Ferrari right now is not only technical, but also mental and organizational. They must find a way to offer Hamilton and Leclerc a predictable, stable, and competitive environment, something that allows both pilots to focus only on maximizing their performance. Otherwise, they will continue to be spectators of a fight for the title in which they could be involved, but of which they are increasingly away. Lewis Hamilton has once again demonstrated that, even in a new environment, with an unpredictable car and in a season that has not begun as many imagined, their talent is still intact. Its ability to adapt, to squeeze the minimum performance in adverse conditions, and its silent leadership within Ferrari are proof that it remains one of the best pilots in the history of Formula One. But something even more important has also been exposed. Individual talent is not enough when the project that surrounds you has no solid basis. Ferrari, in his attempt to return to the top, has put together a team with weight names, but its technical execution continues to depend on a machinery that does not always respond. The contradictory results, the lack of consistency and strategic errors have transformed what should be a consolidation season in a stage of doubts and urgencies. While other teams such as McLaren have managed to evolve from precision, Ferrari still seems to try to find their place in an increasingly demanding Formula One. And for Hamilton, every weekend is a race against time. Not only against his rivals, but against his own car, against the yield margins that are shrinking, and against a narrative that hopes to see him lift the trophy for the 8th time. What lived in Miami was not a simple bad result or a good tactical podium. It was a clear warning that this championship will be defined by regularity and efficiency, two things that Ferrari still fails to consolidate. There is a lot ahead. Circuits such as Imola, Monaco, and Barcelona will test not only the performance of the car, but also the mental strength of the entire team. Hamilton needs more than talent to win. He needs a machine that responds to his hands and a team that does not fail in the basics. Because if Ferrari cannot offer that soon, what today is hope could become resignation. And now the question is in the air. Do you think Hamilton will reverse the situation and really fight for the championship?